Alright, so Aglaea is about to get her rerun banner in Honkai Star Rail. So today, we're first going to do a little recap of what Aglaea can do, and then we're going to talk about whether or not her rerun is worth pulling for. And I am going to be talking for both people who don't have Aglaea, as well as people who may want to invest more into their Aglaea with her light cone or some Eidolons as well. So starting out with the recap of what she does, Aglaea is a Lightning Remembrance character, and she was also the first Remembrance DPS style character. So before we get to how her general gameplay goes, let's talk about the two biggest parts of her kit here, which are the Seam Stitch state and the Memo Sprite talents that her Memo Sprite has. So for the Seam Stitch first, this is a state that is applied to enemies whenever Aglaea uses her basic attack on them, while her Memo Sprite, the Garment Maker, is on the field. This state only takes effect on the most recent target of Aglaea's basic attack, and anytime this enemy is attacked, they are going to take some extra lightning damage as well. So this ends up being super important because it does help a lot of the mechanics of Aglaea and the Garment Maker, which we're going to get into right now with the Memo Sprite talents, because there are a few different Memo Sprite talents here for Garment Maker, but the big one is that anytime the Garment Maker attacks an enemy that has the Seam Stitch, they're going to gain 55 speed, and this buff can stack up to 6 times, which is a very crazy amount of speed you can get on a character. Because Aglaea and Garment Maker, this is a character that is really going to benefit from a lot of speed. Also from the Memo Sprite talent, the Memo Sprite skill is going to prioritize the enemy that has Seam Stitch, so you are going to be able to get that extra damage proc as well from the way that Seam Stitch works. And also, anytime Garment Maker is summoned, it's going to be action forwarded by 100%, and Aglaea will gain 20 energy anytime Garment Maker disappears from the field. And as we're going to see in her kit here when we talk about her gameplay loop now, energy is very important for Aglaea as well as speed. So for Aglaea's general just gameplay loop, first, you want to either use her skill or her technique to summon the Garment Maker, because having Garment Maker on field as much as possible is very good. And then you want to use her ultimate when you have enough energy to enter the Supreme Stance state. And this is where a lot of your damage is going to come from, because firstly, Aglaea is able to gain all of those speed stacks we talked about in the Memo Sprite talent from Garment Maker onto herself. And she's also going to get a pretty big attack buff based on a percentage of her speed as well as the Garment Maker's speed as well. So this is going to allow her to do way more damage when you're in the Supreme Stance state. You will also get a enhanced basic attack during this state that is going to become a blast attack as opposed to single target, and Aglaea is not able to use her skill during this state. And the Supreme Stance state has a countdown on the action order, so anytime you get to this countdown, the Garment Maker will actually exit the field and the Supreme Stance state will end. And if you're able to use her ultimate while the countdown is still active, then you're going to reset the duration of it, allowing you to stay in the Supreme Stance state even more, which is really what you want to do, because you're going to do way more damage having this state up than not having it up. So the big thing for Aglaea is just getting into Supreme Stance and trying to maintain the state as much as possible to get the most amount of damage out of her. And that is really like the core of her gameplay, as simple as possible. Get into Supreme Stance and use, your allies and have a high enough speed to where she can do a lot of attacks. So that is everything, just to recap what Aglaea does. So now let's talk about how good is she as an overall character. So I think Aglaea is a very solid DPS character. She can do well in endgame content, but this does rely on the characters you're using her with, because Aglaea has a pretty high energy cost for her ultimate. So you're going to need allies that are going to be able to not only give her more actions, but also to give her energy as well, making her best team the combination of Aglaea, Sunday, Robin, and Huohuo. And even with this as well, if you have her at E0, which we'll talk about once we get to vertical investment, you may see some inconsistencies with keeping the Supreme Stance state up all the time. So now that we talked about that, let's talk about whether or not you should be pulling for this Rerun Banner. If it's your first copy, I really don't think, in comparison to other DPS characters, that Aglaea is that worth pulling for, if you have her at E0, or if you're just getting her for E0. Both her signature light cone, Eidolons, and also just her team are going to be a massive buff. And also her team is expensive, so if you are a newer player, you probably don't have Sunday at this point since he hasn't reran in 3.x yet. So without Sunday and the other characters on her best team, she's going to perform way worse than you might expect her to. So now let's talk about whether or not Aglaea is worth pulling on your account here. So for people who are just pulling her for the first time, I really don't think in comparison to other DPS characters, she's that worth it, because her team is very expensive with needing several limited characters, one of which being Sunday, who hasn't even reran during 3.x yet. So if you're a newer player, you probably just don't have Sunday. And also, vertical investment, which we'll talk about in a moment, is going to be a massive buff regardless of which direction you go in, making her a lot more consistent in keeping up with the Supreme Stance state. And yeah, I think in comparison, especially with the DPS that's on banner right now in the Herda, she's going to be a lot more valuable for a free-to-play player, and she's a lot better at E0, even though she does still get a massive buff like Aglaea does from having that light cone and from having vertical investment. Comparing them E0 to E0, Aglaea just doesn't measure up because of how much she relies on energy and how much she relies on keeping up that Supreme Stance state. So now to talk about vertical investment here, if you pulled Aglaea E0 and you're realizing how inconsistent she can be at times depending on your build, your allies, and just not having vertical investment, you're probably thinking, do I pull for the light cone first or do I pull for E1? Now, both of these are very good, but I think E1 is the better option if you can only go for one of them. So for Aglaea's E1, Aglaea is going to be able to deal 15% extra damage to the enemy with Seam Stitch, and anytime Aglaea and the Garment Maker attack the enemy that has Seam Stitch, they're going to gain 20 energy. And this makes the energy issue not so much of an issue anymore, because with Aglaea's super high speed during the Supreme Stance state, you're going to be doing a lot of attacks on this enemy. So as long as you keep targeting them and then the Garment Maker's attacks will automatically target the enemy with Seam Stitch, you are going to get a good amount of energy back. And with allies like Sunday and Huohuo, you're going to be able to get your ultimate loops pretty consistently. So that is going to be an amazing Eidolon to have for keeping up her consistency. But now to talk about her signature light cone. So this light cone is going to give 12 speed unconditionally, which is very nice to get her to a high speed amount. And anytime the wearer of the light cone and their Memo Sprite attack, they're going to gain 1 stack of Brocade. Each stack is going to give them 9% crit damage, and when you get Brocade to the max of 6 stacks, the wearer is also going to get a 9% basic attack damage buff. So this is very good for Aglaea in giving her some extra speed and some extra damage overall as well. So yeah, both the E1 and S1 are going to give you a lot of value. But also, if you are a player who already has those and is thinking of investing even further, let's talk about Aglaea's other Eidolons here. Her E2 is going to allow her to ignore 14% of the enemy's defense when either she attacks or when the Garment Maker attacks as well. This can stack up to 3 times, and this effect will last until another ally actively uses an ability. So automatically activating abilities like Locha's auto heal, for example, those will not trigger this. And the fact that it can stack up to 3 times is very good, because you will likely have moments where Aglaea is going to be able to attack, and then the Garment Maker, and then maybe even Aglaea attacking again based on how much speed you have. So you can get a lot of defense ignore off of that and do a lot more damage. Then for her E4, the maximum amount of stacks for Garment Maker's speed buffs will increase from 6 to 7, making the attack buff that Aglaea gets from entering the Supreme Stance state even higher, and also just making both of their speeds even higher during that state, since Aglaea does inherit the stacks as well. And also now, anytime Aglaea attacks the enemy with Seam Stitch on her own, those will also increase the amount of speed stacks that Garment Maker has, which is also very good to get you up to max stacks a lot faster, which is pretty solid buff overall. And then lastly for E6, in the Supreme Stance state, Aglaea gets a 20% Lightning Res Pen buff, and she'll also increase the enhanced basic attacks damage based on her speed And at the maximum with all the speed stacks that you get, it is going to be pretty easy to get to that maximum. Is going to be up to a 60% increase of damage, which paired with everything else in the kit is going to be very solid as well. So that really is everything about Aglaea here. I think under the right circumstances, she is a very solid DPS character. But if you're someone who's either newer to the game or doesn't really have all the characters that are going to make Aglaea look very good, she's probably not going to be as worth pulling for. But in the right situation, in the right hands, I think Aglaea can be a very solid character. So that is going to be everything from me here. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed and want to see more content from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And also let me know in the comments what you all think about Aglaea. But with that, everyone, I will see you all next time.